Hi, I'm Holly from Accrual Mistress Bookkeeping and Consulting, and today we're going to talk about how to create and or edit a rule in the new QuickBooks Online AI-powered banking feed. Now, you'll notice the navigation is a little bit different. If you are struggling with the new navigation of QuickBooks Online, I do actually have a separate video for that. That will be linked below. But for right now, we're just going to talk about how we can add or edit rules so that we can make our data entry a little bit quicker and easier, as well as hopefully more accurate. So in order to navigate to the bank feed, I could do that one of two ways. I could either click on accounting here, or I could go to my bookmarks where I have happened to bookmark the bank feed. So once I am in the bank feed for the account where I want to start making rules, I have a couple different ways that I can go about this. You can see on the side here, I can actually click right here and create a rule from scratch. Now, if you happen to know all of the information, that is a really phenomenal option. Additionally, if you're going to be making a rule that might apply to more than one type of transaction, and we'll get into why you might want to do that in a moment here, you might want to go ahead and just create a rule from scratch. But if I have a specific item in mind or a specific transaction where I want to create a rule, I'm actually going to go about this process a little bit differently to make it a little bit easier on myself. So let's say, I'll go ahead and close that there. Let's say that I wanted to create a rule for this transaction right here. We have this transaction for QuickBooks for $35. Now, if you're a QuickBooks user, you're familiar with the fact that your subscription for QuickBooks is going to come through and be the same amount every single month, but you might have other transactions that are occurring that also have QuickBooks in the description. So when I create this rule, I'm going to make sure that the rule only applies to this transaction. Now, we might have other money going out for QuickBooks for merchant processing. We wouldn't want the rule to capture those. And we might actually have money coming in from Intuit if we had any, refunds or anything take place, or if we ended up with a QuickBooks Online checking account where we are actually earning interest. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click anywhere in this line to expand this transaction and get a little bit more detail on it. And what I will do from here is I will click Create Rule down at the very bottom of that window. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to pull some of the information over for me so that I don't have to start from scratch when entering the information. So I'm going to say I want this rule to be called QBO subscription. And it will be a money out transaction. I can either apply it to all bank accounts, or I can say that I only want it to apply to certain ones. This is phenomenal if you have multiple different checking accounts, and especially if you're using things like classes or locations, and you want each checking account to be associated with a specific class or location, you can build the rule out to capture those transactions. But this is a little simpler. I only have this one bank account in my little training file here, so I actually do want to go ahead and have it apply to all of my bank accounts. Now, here's where things get fun and interesting. We can say includes any of the following or all. Okay, so any is one of the things that you might do if you want a rule to apply to more than one transaction. And we'll, like I said, get into that in just a few minutes here. But we're going to go ahead and create the rule just for this QuickBooks subscription for now. I'm going to change this from description to bank text contains QuickBooks, okay? And actually, we can see here the memo says QuickBooks subscription. So I'm going to say QuickBooks sub. I'm going to add an additional condition here because I want to be sure that it's only going to pick up the transactions that are $35 exactly. So I'm going to add a condition saying amount is exactly $35, okay? Then, once I have told QuickBooks how to identify the transaction that I want the rule to apply to, I then have to tell it what I want it to do from that point. So I want it to be, it's obviously an expense because it's money going out. I want the category to be dues and subscriptions. I want to go ahead and say, QuickBooks is the vendor, and it's always best to have vendor names in there if you can. It just provides a little bit more detail for anybody who is looking at these transactions. And then I'm also going to say I want it to keep the existing bank memo instead of overwriting the bank memo. Now, that's kind of up to you. If you don't want it to do that, you can by all means leave that box unchecked. But I like the fact that it will provide a little bit more data. And then if there's any additional data like a transaction code, or if it provides the date of the transaction, again, that's just there. Nothing's going to change. We're all set. The last thing that I personally do when I'm creating a rule in QuickBooks Online is I make sure that this auto add is turned off. And the reason for that, quite simply, is that I want to be able to look and see whether or not a rule is working the way that I want it to before I have it automatically add a whole bunch of transactions, okay? While you can, of course, recall transactions and, bring them back, reclassify them. Accountants have tools to mass reclass transactions if necessary. I just don't like to take that risk, okay? I am all about trust but verify. So while I hope this rule is going to capture the transaction the way that I want it to, I'm going to go ahead and just take a step back and make sure before I go ahead and have it auto add. Now, if you watch a rule for a little while and you know that it's working well, you can by all means toggle that auto add on, and I'll show you where to do that in just a moment. So now that I have this rule and I have everything worked out the way I want it to, I'm going to hit save. Now, at this point, we can see a rule has been applied to this particular transaction, which is perfect. That's exactly what we wanted to see. But let's say that we decide now we want to go ahead and edit that rule to turn on the auto add. Well, in order to add the rule, I would simply go over here to Rules from that left-hand navigation menu under Accounting. And by the way, if you can't see that particular set of options, you can always collapse or expand these menus, which actually ended up being a little bit of a net gain when we're looking at the navigation from before and having to mouse over everything exactly to navigate to a screen. So I'm going to go here to Rules, and you can see I have two rules that I've created in this sample file for different transactions. Let's say that I've now decided that I want both of them, or well, we'll just make the QuickBooks one. We know the QuickBooks one is working as we want it to, so I'm going to say auto add this transaction. And then I'm going to hit save. Now you can see here that changed something in this grid. So it is showing me that we now have auto add turned on for that particular transaction. So if I go back to bank transactions here, we can see that QuickBooks Online transaction was automatically added over. It means that I don't see it or review it before it gets posted to my books, okay? So again, that's something where I say, kind of do it at your own peril. If you are confident that a rule is working exactly how you want it to, great, have it auto add, no problem. And that can save a lot of time. But if you want to be able to verify before it gets added to books, it's definitely a good idea to leave auto add turned off. Now, let's say that we wanted to make some additional changes to a rule. Let's say that we wanted to change this Office Depot rule, for example. I could go back in here to Rules, select Edit, and then let's say that I wanted to be sure that anything from Office Depot was being classified as office supplies only if the transaction was under $150, okay? If it was over $150, I have to assume that I'm either buying, a computer monitor, a computer, or let's be honest, toner, which still would be office supplies, but those other things I might want to classify in a different way. So I will add an amount field here and say is less than, and we'll call it $150, okay? So what would happen here is if I had a transaction from Office Depot that was over $150, this rule would not apply to it any longer. That doesn't happen to be the case here. That transaction was $124 and change, I believe. So it would still be captured by this rule. But if I had a new transaction flow through and the total was over $150, this rule would not be applied to that transaction. I would have to decide how I wanted that transaction to be classified. So That's a really cool thing we can do with rules. And like I said, you can say less than, equal to, is greater than, whatever it happens to be. You can apply any type of criteria to a transaction. Now, let's go ahead and we're going to do a slightly more advanced rule here. So let's say that I have a transaction, and this is a very common example. Let's say that I have a client who goes to gas stations all the time. I have a client who's a construction company, and the guys are always putting gas in the company vehicles on the company credit card, okay? So they might go to 50 different gas stations in a week because there are 30 guys out there in 30 different vehicles doing whatever. I found that it really doesn't make sense to have a separate vendor and a separate transaction or a separate rule for every single possible gas station. And at the end of the day, that's just not likely. That's not possible. I don't know all of the different gas stations that exist across the United States. So what I did is I created a rule that would actually pick up multiple different transactions and classify them all the same way. So I'll show you how I did that right now. I'm going to create a new rule, and I'll do this from scratch so you can see how this looks. Now we can see here, when I bring this rule up and create it from scratch, it does not bring a description forward like it did when I did this from the bank feed. This means that I have to know what the description is going to be in order for the rule to be applied, okay? And to be honest, in this particular example, I don't think we're going to have a rule that this applies to because I don't think there were any gas station transactions in my particular bank feed just now. But let's go ahead and call this, I'm going to call it gas station 1. And the reason for that is that you cannot have a rule with more than one rule with the same name. So if you were hypothetically doing this, and I did this for a client recently, you're only allowed to add a certain number of conditions to every single rule. So if you go over that number, you have to then create another rule. So I have, I want to say, half a dozen gas station rules on their books to capture all the different gas stations that they visit and go to, because we can only have so many conditions here on our rule. So I'm going to leave the rest of this the same though. We have money out, all bank accounts. Now here's where we alter what we did before. Instead of saying and include the following all, we're going to say and include the following any, okay? From there, I'm going to add, again, bank text. I just have found in my experience, it's a little bit more accurate at capturing the rules and the different transactions as they come in. I'm going to say Chevron. I'm going to add another condition and say bank text contains AM PM. Or actually, I'm sorry, AM PM is ARCO, isn't it? There we go. ARCO, we'll say contains Safeway fuel, because I know that Safeway fuel always shows up on the transaction bank detail. We'll say bank text contains, let's say 76. Now, here's where we have to be careful when we are creating rules, okay? From time to time, we might apply a condition where we will see this come up in another bank description that has nothing to do with this transaction. So for example, bank text contains 76. If I'm creating this rule, I might opt not to apply this to all to all bank accounts. I might opt to apply it only to the credit card or bank account where gas is being purchased, and here's why. A check might have 76 in the check number, and that comes through as part of the bank detail, okay? So I might inadvertently apply this rule to a check that has nothing to do with gas. So you just want to kind of be sure that you're being simultaneously specific enough to capture only the transactions that you want and broad enough that you're not accidentally going to miss something, right? So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and go through that process. All of these are expenses. We're going to say category is, I don't have a car and truck one yet. So we'll say we're going to add a new one. And I'm going to say fuel. It is an expense. auto. And since I don't have a car bucket for expenses just yet in here, I'm going to go ahead and leave this as its own account. But in an ideal world, I would also have a, car and truck expenses or something to that effect. And I would actually choose to make this account the sub account of that so that all of those expenses would show up at once. Also, a sub account of car and truck would be things like parking and tolls and other things like that. But again, for the purposes of this example, I'm just going to go ahead and hit save here. And then again, I don't want to have this automatically add. The last thing here, because I did say that it's always a good thing to have a payee in place. So what do you do if your rule is going to be capturing a whole bunch of different possible payees? Well, there are only a certain number of instances where I recommend doing this. But I actually will create a payee called gas stations. And here's why. You might be going to a whole bunch of different gas stations through the course of making these visits. And as you can see, we're going to Chevron, we're going to Arco, we're going to Safeway Fuel, we're going to 76. While you could create a different vendor for each one of those, it kind of doesn't matter from a record keeping perspective. We want to know that you went to a gas station, and sure, it's great to know which gas station you go to, but if you're possibly talking about hundreds of transactions a month, and they are for sure all gas stations, having them go to a general gas station payee is perfectly fine. And it can actually make reviewing these numbers a little bit easier. From the standpoint of, if I run an expenses by vendor report, I don't have to go to 20 different gas stations to figure out the total I spent looking at a report that way. Of course, it would be in fuel under the profit and loss, but you don't have to go elsewhere and drill down more into reports to confirm that number or to match things up. You could just go to a single vendor and see all of the transactions that are posted to gas stations, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and hit save on this. And again, this is a rule where this particular one won't have any examples for us to look at in this particular set of books, but you can feel free to try this on your own books or to try it in the QuickBooks Online sample file and see how it works. Now, something to keep in mind here is that rules actually have an order of operations where they are applied in a certain order. So if I want QuickBooks to look at a certain rule first, I can actually move these rules up and down. So I want it, when it is looking through to pick detail out of transactions, I want it to look for these criteria first before it starts looking for any of these other criteria. And again, we can move these around and toggle them, okay? That tells me what their priority is and which ones should be applied first. I don't have any specific examples of why that is significant. Again, we could be looking at things like check numbers. If we're using numbers, we want the check number portion to go first, or we want that rule to be applied later. But you can change, it's basically, think of it like order of operations. We can change the order that QuickBooks will consult these rules in to make sure that we are classifying things correctly, okay? So, and actually, I'm sorry, an example for this would be, I might want to put all of my Office Depot rules right next to each other so that if there's one that's, over 150, we're still having it pick up right here and it's being applied in that order. All right, so that is a brief overview of rules in QuickBooks Online. It does show you the new format that we have here, the new bank feed. This is the new AI bank feed, so we are seeing pending, posted, excluded instead of categorized, and still excluded, but categorized and excluded. And this is what that new AI feature looks like. Again, we have, match categorized toggle. There are a lot of other differences that are coming up here. So if this is not what your bank feed looks like, I do have a video. Again, I'll go ahead and link that below. That is how to create a rule in the old file. So it's going to show you this exact same process, just with what the bank feeds used to look like. That is still live on my channel. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop those in the comments below. Once again, I'm Holly. I'm the owner of Accrual Mistress Bookkeeping and Consulting. And if you have any questions about QuickBooks, how to do things in the file, how to navigate it, please do let me know. I would be more than happy to continue to create videos. And if you found this helpful, please do like and subscribe.